Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Welcome back to the House of Lee, House of Spike Lee, that is, here on Houselights on the Nerd Party Network, the podcast that explores the work of directors. We're looking at seminal works from Mr. Lee from different decades, and so we will go through his entire career, one film at a time from each decade. This week finds us exploring 1992's Malcolm X. And I am delighted, actually, to talk about this film because I, myself, have a long history with this film from the first time I saw it up until now. I'm one of your hosts, John Mills, and joining me, as always, are Tristan Riddell and Darren Moser to explore this work that made a big splash in 1992, and we'll be taking a look at to see, has it held up, and was it worth the praise at the time, and would it be worth the praise were it released now? So, I'm going to fess up. I've seen this movie several times before this point. I forget precisely when I encountered it, but I came across it many years ago. And, one of the centerpieces of it, as always, is Denzel Washington. This is like a landmark performance of his career. And that's saying something, considering we even talked about Glory previously, where he won a Best Supporting Actor Oscar, and all of the work that he's done since. But this is definitely a role that he's very much associated with. And we'll get to how he came into the role and everything like that. But obviously, I'm talking about how much I've seen it before. And we always love to talk about our first encountering of it. And I believe Tristan and Darren, this is your first time seeing the film for both of you. And so, Tristan, I'll toss it to you first. When you came into this film, I mean, we talked about this with Do the Right Thing. What kind of background did you have with it? Had people talked about it a lot? Was it a movie you had always been curious to see? Was it something that people had said, it's not worth the hype? Like, what kind of preconceived notions were you coming in with?
I mean, that's a really solid question, because this is one of those films that I knew about just because of the poster, where it was Denzel's face, and sometimes just like with a big X, like, this is Malcolm X. This is him playing Malcolm X. And it was never really, I was never the biggest Spike Lee fan for a very long time. I've grown to respect his filmmaking techniques. As his filmography has grown, my appreciation for his work has grown. But back in the day, I'd never really liked Spike Lee. And so I kind of stayed away from it. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to hate it. It was just kind of like, oh, Spike Lee. I like Denzel, but I don't really like Spike Lee. So I never really heard anything about it. I've never seen a clip from it. I've never seen...
Really? Not even a clip?
Not even a clip.
See, that fascinates me. Wow, that's amazing.
This was so far outside of my radar. It's just, no one talked about it. No one talked about it in the negative. No one talked about it in the positive. It just wasn't talked about. And so it was not really in my consciousness. It was something I saw at Blockbuster, beginning and end of sentence.
That's fascinating. I mean, Darren, are you coming at it from the same sort of angle, or had people talked it up in the years coming up to this point?
I had at least seen a clip. I had seen the clip when he goes to the police station and is commanding the group outside. It's very powerful, one of the most powerful scenes of the movie. And I don't think it was the entire thing, but just the, putting his hand up and then just kind of going to point, and they all just march off. And it is just, it is a very well acted scene. And I was looking forward to this, though. I mean, we love Denzel, and this...
Oh, yeah. If you haven't listened to the show before this episode, we are big Denzel fans.
Yeah, honestly, I'm a card-carrying member of the Denzel Washington fan club, and I think you two gentlemen are as well, because the guy's just an incredible actor.
Between Tony Scott and Zwick, we watched 6 Denzel movies in a row unintentionally. But
right.
We're like, oh, we just found the directors that loved Denzel and just went from there. So, so I was looking forward to that. I knew a little bit about it, as far as I knew that Malcolm X was assassinated. I knew a lot of it took place in the 60s, but I didn't know how far back we were going to go. I didn't know it was going to be very long, like Lord of the Rings chapter long. But you know, it sunk in. It sunk into telling this story, and it committed to a pace and stuck with that. So you know what? It's the age of streaming. It's the age of pausing. I can chop it up into a bit. I actually watched this over, I think, 2 days. The second of day being apparently Malcolm X Day, which I didn't realize that May 19th was that day.
We're actually recording this on May 19th, which is the proposed and in some places celebrated Malcolm X Day.
Yeah, it was a little surreal where the very end of the movie, Nelson Mandela is saying, and that's why we celebrate on May 19th. And I looked over at the calendar. I'm like, oh, I didn't know I was that topical.
Well, that's it. You know, you touch on it commits to a pace and it sticks with the pace. And so, Tristan, you know, I tease you all the time about your editorial quibbles and stuff like that. Not going to throw any jokes out there from the past.
60 minutes would you cut out of this movie, Tristan?
You know what? I would like to just sort of like build on what you were saying, though, Darren, was like, do you agree that it stuck to a pace, that it was committed to telling at a certain pace and that it didn't waver? Or did you find that there were any ebbs and flows in the storytelling?
I thought there were ebbs and flows all over the place. I think Darren is correct that it stuck to a certain pace. I think Lee knew exactly what he wanted to do, and that was very clear. It came across very clearly that this is what he wanted to make. This is the movie he wanted to make. And there's some behind the scenes information that I thought was very interesting about how, I think, I can't remember who the initial studio was, but they got cold feet, and then it eventually wound up at Warner Brothers. And they said, they're like, okay, we're only going to pay for a 2 hour and 20-minute movie. And Lee said, no, screw that. Like, I need this to be 3 hours and 20 minutes. And so during post-production, they pulled they said, we're not giving you any more money. Like, you only have enough money to make a 2 hour and 20-minute film. And so they'd actually halted post-production, and Spike Lee went to some of his rich friends and said, hey, will you give to this project? And he made it clear that it's not a loan, it's not an investment. This is a straight up gift just to make sure that this movie got made. And I think it was like Michael Jordan, Oprah Winfrey, Bill Cosby. I think though the woman who started the Duke Ellington School, you know, like some really big names from really big celebrities who were Black that were like, yes, like we have money, we have influence. Here's the funding you need to tell this story. And so you could tell it was very important to Lee to get that extra hour. Now, to me, I want to preface this comment, and actually the entire podcast before we move forward, is that we are talking about Malcolm X the movie, directed by Spike Lee. That's what we're talking about tonight. We're not talking about Malcolm X the man. We're talking about Malcolm X as portrayed by Denzel Washington and Spike Lee. And so just wanted to get that out there, that any criticisms that we have for the movie or the portrayal or the performance or whatever is just that. And that's what this podcast is about. So with me, I think this movie should have been 2 hours and 20 minutes. I very much think this movie should have been 2 hours and 20 minutes. Now, what the hell do I know? Who knows? Because this movie has a Criterion edition and it got accepted into the National Film Registry. So obviously, this movie struck a chord.
You're wrong, Tristan.
Yeah, that's basically what I'm saying, is that like 3 hours and 22 minutes, it was fine for a lot of people, and this movie struck a chord. For me personally, as I was watching this, and I kind of want to propose this to you guys, if you don't mind me doing that, is this movie should have started with him going to prison like Shawshank, and then give a few flashbacks to how he wound up there. And I think you would have a much stronger piece, in my opinion.
I'm actually going to politely disagree with you on that. Because,
Please do.
Because, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to disagree specifically because I don't have an issue with the length of it. And I think I don't have an issue with the length of it because I think it was 91 or 90. Yeah, it was 91 where JFK came out. And that is Oliver Stone's, like, the ultimate 1960s retrospective double feature for me is JFK and Malcolm X. Like those two movies put together, because it's two very singular visions of the time from two very singular directors who have a very clear vision of what they're trying to say about that period in history. And I understand what you're saying about trimming time. I would find other ways to tighten this up. I agree that 3.5 hours is self-indulgent. I think that this is, while I wouldn't cut a whole hour out of it, I could get this closer to 3 hours, maybe even 2 hours 45. But I enjoy the fact that it's given an epic sense to it, specifically because Malcolm X is a figure that by this point in history hadn't been given a fair amount of attention to. And I think that what Lee feels coming into it is, no, this person is of sufficient importance. We talk about JFK all the time. We talk about MLK all the time. We talk about Vietnam all the time. We talk about all of these things all the time. We never really talk about somebody like Malcolm X or Huey Newton or even RFK. Like, he's always in the shadow of JFK, and it's like he had his own thing going, man. Like, it's not fair. We even had Danny DeVito's like 2.5+ hour Hoffa movie. So it's like, I think that this slots right in perfectly well there. I think where it's self-indulgent, and I think maybe what you're responding to, is Spike Lee's invention of a character so that he could play Malcolm X's best friend for a first portion of like the first act of the film, is like, that feels a little bit wedged in there. Like, I don't think that Lee's performance is as I'm looking for the right word, but it's not as flat as it was in Do the Right Thing, right? He feels more naturally in here with Denzel.
But he's also literally the first person we see in the film called Malcolm X, and we see Spike Lee himself, the director, instead of seeing Malcolm X first.
That is true. That is true. But and Darren, I'll throw this over to you. Like, is the length of the film an issue for you? Because the thing is, I get it. Like 3.5 hours, that's a big ask of somebody. And so you got to put yourself, you mentioned streaming, the ability to pause. Is this a film, though, objectively speaking, you would have been okay with sitting in a movie theater for 3.5 hours watching?
I mean, maybe this is a cop-out answer, but I think this movie would have been better served as like a miniseries. It makes me think of like Dune, like Children of Dune, and other like seminal works where, like, give him more time. Give him, I guess this would have been roughly 4 episodes, an hour-ish each. Give him like 5 or 6, like a 6-episode biopic, even if you're still broadcasting it. It's like everybody tunes in at 5 o'clock for a week straight, or however you want to air it. I mean, that's back in 92. Nowadays, that would obviously just drop all at once, on a streaming platform. But it's like, often I feel with movies of this length, you kind of reach a tipping point where if you're going to give it that much time anyway, just go all in and just give them all the time they need. It affects how you're going to cut it, how you're going to pace it. You're going to have kind of natural chapter breaks that kind of make it more watchable, because you can pop in an episode or two for a night and then come back, as opposed to, if this was a double VHS, it probably was. If Titanic was, this definitely was.
This definitely was
a double VHS. Where do you put that cut? Where do you make the stop? So I would say, the short answer, no, it really wasn't. It didn't turn me off to watching it. I had to schedule my life to accommodate it. But I would have been fine if this had been a miniseries and even longer. I think there's material there. You could have fleshed it out a little more. I don't want just to push the running time, but I think a miniseries of this would have been amazing, and maybe the better format, but not in 92. That didn't exist, or that was less likely.
Well,
sorry, not existing. It was less likely to be the choice. Like, your choice was easy.
That's for sure.
So that when you're deciding, how do I want to make this? Yeah, I get, a movie, you make money, it's in theaters, it's really seen, versus a one week of American television and then it's gone. Like, it's a different vibe.
Now, so long as we're talking about the making of and that, all the stuff that went into it and, format and everything like that. One thing that caused a great deal of controversy at the time was the original director, who is the director who brought in Denzel Washington to the project, Norman Jewison, who WB felt was a safe choice for it because he had directed In the Heat of the Night, which was, a big civil rights statement film. And so they brought him in, and there was a protest about Norman Jewison directing a film about Malcolm X. And one of the loudest voices about that was Spike Lee. Now, casting aside any other personal motivations he might have had, because of course he winds up directing the film, Lee has, he made a point that a black director should direct this specific film. One of his reasonings was, and I remember at the time, I haven't researched the quote specifically where it was, but I remember reading at the time that one of his reasonings was he said, don't you think and I'm paraphrasing, don't you think Coppola brought something additional to The Godfather because Italian-American history was part of his upbringing? Which I think it's a valid sort of argument to make. But of course, the argument gets a little tarnished because Lee winds up directing it. But to boil it down to that core element, Tristan, do you think that Spike Lee has more trouble getting a 3.5-hour Malcolm X movie made than Norman Jewison? Like, if Jewison had been directing it, do you think that being an established director, he would have been able to be like, no, listen, studio, I'm doing this the length that I want to? Do you think that Spike Lee himself, the studio started off on a foot where they felt he had sort of bullied his way into the job to begin with, and so they fought him a little bit?
I think that's absolutely the reason. I think he asked for, I think, 33 million, and they said, no, we're going to give you 20. And one of the reasons why is because his movies up until that point had not made a lot of money. Like, he made good films, even with Do the Right Thing. Like, these are good, well-made films and well-received films, but they weren't blockbusters. They weren't movies that, like, had people lining up down the street. They weren't movies that brought in tons of cash. And so when a director who hasn't made a lot of money is asking for a lot of money at that time, 33 was like something like 70, 80 million in today's dollars. Jewison, the guy made In the Heat of the Night and Fiddler. He's going to be able to command a little bit more cash. So again, all, talent completely aside, right choice completely aside, I think that's absolutely one of the reasons why they fought, is because this is a Spike Lee joint, and Spike Lee joints up until this point didn't make a lot of money.
So Darren, given all of these things that come into it, Lee finds himself in the director's chair, has his, arguments back and forth with the studio through the entire thing. The ultimate question becomes, do you think that his visual style, and this is only the second one we're looking at in terms of this series, but I think we've all seen other Spike Lee films up to this point. Do you think his visual sensibility and the editing that he works with, Barry Alexander Brown to put together, does it flow? Does this feel like a film that is an epic film directed by somebody with epic sensibilities, or does it feel like an epic film with somebody who's not used to making epic films?
No, I give him the benefit of the doubt. I give him the credit because it's a beautiful film. You can tell it was a passion project. It was something that he felt really strongly about, and it looks great. It doesn't look like a low budget, I tried. It has, it's also a period piece. So you have to get the cars right and the costumes right and the, wardrobe. I think wardrobe and hairstyle is really on point in this whole movie. There's something as subtle as how someone cuts their hair that places you in the 60s or doesn't. And so all those pieces together, the visual style, it obviously, we're comparing this to Do the Right Thing, which is way more stylistic, has those crazy Dutch angles that Tristan loves. But no, I think it's I don't want to say toned down, but all the shots are poignant. I think The stuff he does where Malcolm is kind of converting to Islam and like has a vision, the intercutting is there a lot more in the beginning, and then it kind of starts to taper away, like as we're getting his past and his father dying and all of that. But then by the time we get to the main, crux of the movie, it's pretty much a solid straight film until we get to the day of his death. And then we start to play with not tempo, but you can tell something's coming. And I think that's on purpose. So very purposeful film. I think you did a fantastic job overall.
Tristan, same question to you. Is this somebody who was ready for this epic scale, or is this something that feels like it got a little bit out of his hands as he did something that was such a 3.5 hour epic versus just even looking back at Do the Right Thing, a 2 hour intimate tale with a small scale to it? Is this a director who was ready for this?
I think even if I disagree with the runtime and the structure, I don't think this was a director that felt like the movie got away from him. This very much felt like, as I said at the beginning of the podcast, like this feels like a movie. This is the movie that Spike Lee wanted to make. He had a vision in his head. This is the story he wanted to tell. He had it on, pen and paper, and he had the storyboards in his head, and then boom, and he made it happen. That's what this movie feels like. Even though it's 3 hours and 22 minutes, and even though I think it should be structured differently or much shorter, at no point did I feel any kind of incompetency, just a disagreement. And so I think Spike Lee at this point in his career, with the amount of quality of his own performance that he brings, this was the right movie at the right time for the right director.
I'm going to obviously agree with the two of you because I think that Lee's natural sensibility to keep scale restrained benefits him, because when things are a larger scale, when there are larger groups, when there are larger crowds, when there's the scene in front of the police station, it's not somebody coming from an idea of, it's not a Jim Cameron sensibility of, we're going to spend $400 million on this one shot, and we're going to bring in people who all, blah, 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 and all of that type of stuff.
You got the sense.
Right.
You got the scale.
So he knew how to frame it and make the most of the real estate on screen. And I felt when I needed to feel like there were things outside of frame, it felt like they were there without forcing it. Now, one other aspect of it is, of course, the casting. I mean, Jewison brings in Denzel Washington, which, I think that, Washington, in a large sense, not just his skills as an actor, but when he grows the goatee near the end, the likeness to Malcolm X visually, like through the whole movie, I'm like, it's Denzel. And then when he grew the goatee, I was like, holy Moses, right? You put on the horn rim glasses and the goatee. I was like, wow, that really evokes the silhouette of Malcolm X. I was impressed with that. But I think that everybody fixates on Washington. And I want to ask, and Darren, I'll toss it to you first. Is Angela Bassett an underappreciated player in this film? Do you think that she provides a necessary anchor, or do you think that she is underutilized? Do you think that she is appropriately appreciated by the director for what she's bringing to the screenplay, to what we're watching?
I'll always see more Angela Bassett. She's an amazing actress. We didn't have any character that kind of represented the outside world. Everything was so inside the Nation of Islam, inside the Brotherhood, inside his home and his house. All we had was the newspaper. That was really all there was to represent, how does the world feel about this? How is the man on the street? How is the rest of the country going by at this moment? And so I felt like she could have maybe served a dual purpose of, because she's not in it as much because he's often not where she is. He even says that, I'm going to be away, I'm going to be gone. But if she could have also represented even more about, this is how people see you, this is how I perceive you. This is how the world is kind of, almost giving a commentary on his life as his life is happening. I think that something like that could have been. It doesn't have to be Angela Bassett for that role, but it could have been. But overall, I feel like that was a gap in the story. I guess to kind of lean off of what you said, I didn't feel like the real world was past the edge of the camera in that regard. I mean, it obviously was, but we were never really told what was going on.
I think
You
that's
just
a
kind of
really
blew my mind.
that's a really great point.
Seriously great point.
Yeah.
I felt that without knowing it, and you articulated it.
Yeah, I think that is actually. I mean, Tristan, I was about to ask you, Tristan. Yeah, well, do you agree with Darren on that one? But I think we both come in. That was a really great encapsulation of what I think is, is it? Does it detract from the film? Does it each viewer will have to decide, sort of thing, right? But Tristan, same question to you, basically. Angela Bassett, in what she's given to do you think that this is an appropriate use of her talents? Could she have been given more of an opportunity in this film, or do you think that she's effective in the way that she's written? And basically, you give an actor the script, and it's like, this is what you're going to say, and this is where you are. Should they have taken a second look at that and said, let's rewrite this a little bit, expand Bassett's performance or her role in some way?
Well, that actually, I'm going to ignore your question. No, I'm not going to ignore your question. No, that's a solid question because it leads me to something larger. That. Do you remember the movie Good Night, Good Luck, directed by George Clooney, about Edward R. Murrow?
Never saw it.
Really? Darren, did you see it?
I think so. It's the about the
Murrow.
It's about
David Strathairn plays Murrow, right?
Yeah, the Red Scare with McCarthy and everything like that.
Yeah.
It's about Murrow against McCarthy.
But yeah.
Woo. Okay. Well. Okay. Well, the thing with that is that so much of the movie is Strathairn performing broadcasts that are recorded. We know what Murrow said. We know exactly what Murrow said. We know exactly what he looked like when he said it. And there's 80% of that movie is stuff that literally happened or was literally said by Murrow. And so it was very much an editor's movie, in my opinion. Good Night, Good Luck. Now, the reason why I'm saying that is so much of this movie of Malcolm X is his speeches, his public speaking events, which obviously you have to do that because Malcolm X was a phenomenal public speaker and a very influential public speaker. I mean, you can't have this movie without having his speeches. In fact, actually, side note to the side note, they almost didn't get the rights to Malcolm X speeches for this movie. And Spike Lee was like, can you imagine making this movie without his speeches? That's like making an Elvis movie without the rights to Elvis music. And while I think that was a great thing because it allowed Washington to shine bright with his speeches. I mean, they're phenomenal. It's some of the best things about the movie. And the reason why it's some of the best things about the movie is because Malcolm X himself was such a great public speaker. All that said, it felt like an editor's movie because of that. It felt like you're recreating instead of creating. And part of me feels like Angela Bassett and her, her character, which is based off of the real life person of Betty Shabazz, who was a consultant on this film, would have been, if you wanted to expand her role, it would have been a great opportunity to create instead of recreate. And so to answer that question, even though I think Angela Bassett did a great job for what she was given, and she did what she needed to do, and I think she made a huge impact on this film with having very little to do, I think this movie would have benefited from a few less speeches, a little bit more Angela Bassett.
I can't disagree. And just as a side note, and this gets back to the whole thing of the late 80s, early 90s, there was an obsession with revisiting the 60s. And because I know so much about the life of Jim Morrison and the Doors, I'll liken what you're talking about to the way Oliver Stone approached
any excuse to bring up Jim Morrison and the Doors.
You know what? Yes, that's true. That is my life. I exist between the two polar extremes of George Lucas and Jim Morrison. Figure that one out, everybody. But it's a similar sort of thing when you approach a biopic, where if you really know the guts of everything, you're like, oh, okay, you combine these people, you reduce this, you increase your focus on that. But specifically about Washington's performance with the speeches, Darren, as he's giving these speeches, did you feel the fire? Like, because I think Tristan is right to call out that, Malcolm X, yes, great orator, tremendous speeches throughout his entire life, and very effective in getting a point across, even controversial ones. And I want to ask, when you watch those speeches, did you feel an emotional connection to what he was saying? Did you have any aha moments where you felt like Lee's point, or the point that he felt Malcolm X was trying to make, did it get through to you in those moments? Or were they a lot of sound and fury?
No, I mean, I'd mentioned before that, the actor playing the policeman who said, oh, he's got too much power for one man, kind of drove me out because it's such a well-known actor, and just it didn't quite, it's like, oh, I'm watching a movie. I didn't feel like I was watching a movie when the speeches were going. I felt like he was, and like you're saying, this decade, I think of like Jaime Escalante, Stand and Deliver. I think of like a lot of really good speech movies we had in this era of movie. And Malcolm X is no slouch in that. So I like the speeches, but it was also just educational, because I don't know a lot about Malcolm X. I don't know his history, or I didn't know a lot about, I knew he converted to Islam, and I knew he, was a champion of that, but I didn't know it was like this group around one man that was a leader of it. And to watch that, and watch that leader fall, as and to see it break Malcolm from, because the confidence that Washington's portrayal put through of everything he's saying is right. This is from his mouth. If we just do this, it'll all work out. So I think those have to go hand in hand in the story. If you're going to present that fall, you have to show his conviction, and the conviction is in the speeches, is how they all come together. So yeah, it was educational. It took me into his world, kind of like I said in the beginning, just the world, nothing outside of that. But that's not necessarily a bad thing as far as the speeches go.
So let me ask you this question, and Tristan, I'll throw this to you first. In terms of the turn that Darren references here, where, he's in the Nation of Islam, but of course we know as we go through his life that he then goes on an actual pilgrimage to Mecca, and something that is a more global mindset. But do you think the film is effective in conveying that turn? Because what I thought of in that moment, let me explain to you, is there was a specific moment in Michael Mann's Ali, the biopic about Muhammad Ali, where he encounters Malcolm after Malcolm has had his issues with the Nation of Islam, and decided that he's seeing something larger than himself and larger than the Nation of Islam there. Did you get the sense that there was, did it adequately convey, because obviously it's conveying it, but did it adequately convey to you that Malcolm had discovered something larger than the worldview he had? Did the film adequately get you on board with the idea that he had changed substantially as a person, in that last act?
I think it did a good job, but I wish it did a better job, if that makes sense. I feel like, like Darren, I knew so little about Malcolm X, because, growing up in America, especially middle America, we're inundated with Martin Luther King Jr. information. Mm-hmm. Like the holiday is a big day, big sections in school about him. I know a lot about Martin Luther King, knew very little about Malcolm X. although, when you talk about Martin Luther King, you often hear about Malcolm X because of they kind of feel like they have the same goal in some respects, but yet very different methodology on how to go about it. And so it's like two sides of the same coin kind of deal. But yet I know way more about heads than I do tails. And so when we got to that point, when he left the Nation of Islam, which is an organization, not just, he didn't leave Islam. He didn't stop being a Muslim. He just left the Nation of Islam. That was news to me. I was like, whoa,
Really?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that was 100% news to me. And so the idea that this man spent 12 years being a mouthpiece for Elijah Muhammad, his words, not mine. And I want to read a quote to you that kind of encapsulates a little bit more about his turn that I knew nothing about. And that was actually the first part that he's referencing was in the movie, but not the second part. So this is a quote from Malcolm X. He says, "Brother, remember that time that white college girls came into the restaurant, the one who wanted to help the black Muslims and the whites get together, and I told her there wasn't a ghost of a chance, and she went away crying. Well, I've lived to regret that incident. In many parts of the African continent, I saw white students helping black people. Something like this kills a lot of argument. I did many things as a black Muslim that I'm sorry for now. I was a zombie then. Like all black Muslims, I was hypnotized, pointed in a certain direction and told to march. Well, I guess a man's entitled to make a fool of himself if he's ready to pay the cost. It cost me 12 years. That was a bad scene, brother. The sickness and madness of those days, I'm glad to be free of them." That is quite a condemnation of how he spent the most influential 12 years of his life. And so for 12 years, this is the Malcolm X that people quote. For 12 years, this is the Malcolm X that people remember. For the movie, it makes sense that you spend a big chunk of the film, if not the majority of the film, on those 12 years, because that's when he became Malcolm X to the nation. However, when the man does such a huge turn in real life, but only has a year left of that turn, like he didn't, like nobody knew that he was going to be, like he had a press conference, I think in 1964, saying that he was leaving the Nation of Islam, and then he was assassinated in 1965. Like you can't make, like when you're spanning a big chunk of his life, you can't make the whole movie just about that turn. However, if you're going to have to me, the 3.5 hour movie felt like a rushed ending because I wanted more Mecca. I wanted more of him exploring his faith, the true faith, and I wanted more of him in that turn. And I feel like we didn't get it.
See, that's the part where you, all the way back at the beginning of this discussion, you were talking about the structure of the film and how in that first act you would have had him thrown into prison and then have flashback of the way he was living his life.
Yeah.
I would have structured the film as him in that last year and throwing back to the things he regretted, so that I would have it all
there, but cast back.
I would have it all framed as the last year of his life, where he's trying to, in a sense, undo the damage that he felt he had done. Because that is one of the most fascinating things about having read the autobiography of Malcolm X, is getting to that point in the book. It is like a sledgehammer to your chest. It's absolutely stunning. Having, like, I can't recreate the emotional effect of reading the autobiography of Malcolm X. It is one of the most influential books on my worldview outside of the Bible that I can possibly give. And that is the one thing I will throw at this film, is, to your point, it's one of the criticisms that I read of this film, and Darren, I'll throw this to you to see if you agree, is that basically, I'm not going to read it word for word, but that the read of the person and the time in history is very surface level and doesn't carry the appropriate emotional weight. And I'm not going to lean all the way into that and agree with it completely, but I'm going to ask you, do you feel that this film, with all of its epic tendencies, truly carries the weight? Like, did it leave you shell-shocked at the end, or was it more of a history lesson to you?
Yeah, it's interesting because, I mean, I had a similar feeling in the end where kind of once we get to that last day, I'm not going to say it's autopilot. It's not quite that rudimentary, but it did have a different feel. It did feel like we're running out the clock. Like, because I'm like, the vibe was, I don't know where the ending is, but I can tell it's soon. And that's a weird thing to pick up because it's not like I was told that, but I'm like, the vibe has shifted. And there were even things in the story where Malcolm is saying it's like a time of martyrs. You know, he's speaking that out, and they're riding to the speaking place, you know, in the cars, and the way the shots are, the way things are building, especially the Spike Lee method of, you know, him on a dolly where he's kind of out of himself. He's not walking, he's just moving forward and has no choice. But I also felt the history part where obviously we're talking about his death. We're talking about it's like if I had to describe this movie in 3 acts, it's Malcolm as we've known him as the peak of history, the change within Islam, and then death. And those are not equal pieces of the pie and runtime for sure. We get I agree with you. I think we should have had more after that change because I would have wanted more of the change, but I also wasn't sad we got a lot of speech Malcolm because you need that, because otherwise when he starts to, his worldview starts to change, it crumbles. And I'm actually interested now in reading that autobiography because it wasn't a sledgehammer, but I felt that impact because his speeches change. And when he starts to go like, hey, anybody who wants to help, we're open to everybody. Like we have to, versus the, you know, the way they portrayed it where the white woman on the college campus said like, hey, how can we help you? And he's like, you can't. Like that door slamming is so impactful. So I'm kind of spiraling in all the different points, but all that to say is, I think that's where, kind of circling back to my beginning statement on, I think this should have been a miniseries. And I think that would have given a better balance on the back end that we didn't get. Give us the whole front half of Speech Malcolm and then make the whole second half the change within Islam and then like a whole episode on the last day. You know, I think that pacing would have would fed even more that I wanted to consume. I wanted to know that part of his history.
Tristan, same question to you. Does the film adequately convey sort of that emotional impact, that you know, all the different things that Darren's talking about there?
No. I feel like
okay.
I feel like I kind of talked about that earlier.
Sure. I mean, but I'm sort of trying to get a consensus here about everything, because for me, I agree, but there's an odd sort of acceptance of it that is odd, because this is one of those films where I think that the performance of the lead is so incredibly good, so charismatic, so compelling that it glosses over so many of the flaws of the film.
Absolutely.
And it's stunning because, again, Lee isn't the one who cast him. He inherits Denzel Washington. And it feels like Denzel Washington's performance was inevitable in a way. And since we're a director-focused podcast, it feels very much like it didn't matter that Lee was the director behind the camera. And that is unfortunate, because I think that if you really look at this with a very critical eye, this is a film where you can legitimately look at the performance of an actor, subtract it, and say, this movie is not nearly as good without them. Now, there are plenty of films like that. And where I'm building to is that at the Academy Awards ceremony for this year, Denzel Washington loses to Al Pacino for Scent of a Woman, which for many years I have considered a consolation Oscar for Pacino never having won one before that point, and he should have won Best Supporting for Ricky Roma the year before. But hey, that's just me. It's also a year where Malcolm X, the film, goes up against Unforgiven, which is Clint Eastwood's big time Western.
Man, was Unforgiven really 1992?
Yes, it was. It went up. Malcolm X was not even nominated for Best Picture. Unforgiven was nominated for Best Picture. The Crying Game was nominated. A Few Good Men. Howard's End, which is a movie I still haven't seen because that is just not in my wheelhouse, guys. I'm going to be completely honest with you. And then Scent of a Woman. Those were up for Best Picture, but Malcolm X was not. Now, this is a two-part question. Did this performance here, based on what you've seen, have either of you seen Scent of a Woman?
Yes.
Okay. Was Denzel Washington's performance here more pivotal to the success of Malcolm X as a film than Al Pacino's to Scent of a Woman?
I don't know if that's the question.
Okay.
I think Denzel Washington did a magnificent job encapsulating the character of the real person Malcolm X. Having seen the speeches, the real speeches and the fake ones, there were times when I felt like I stopped watching Denzel, and that's a testament. And I believe he deserved to be nominated, and I think he should have easily won. However, having seen Scent of a Woman only once, just because it was on TV, I have seen Scent of a Woman referenced many times because of Pacino's performance. Do I think Pacino's performance is better than Denzel Washington's in Malcolm X? Not necessarily, leaning towards no. However, Pacino's performance in Scent of a Woman pierced the zeitgeist more than Denzel's in Malcolm X. And that's what I'm going to say about that. Is that more people talked about Pacino than Washington. More people referenced Pacino than Washington in reference to these two respective movies. And because I feel like Pacino was much more, and obviously bombastic. It's like, oh, I'm just getting warmed up. Like it's just like everybody knows the Ferrari scene, the pseudo courtroom scene at the end,
the tango scene.
The tango scene. You have these iconic, very cinematic moments, and with Malcolm X, you have a real life recreation. And so it's almost like apples and oranges. Even though Denzel did a phenomenal job, Pacino created a character not from scratch because somebody wrote it, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, getting back to the create versus recreate sense that you were talking about. That's fair. That's a fair enough statement. And then in terms of Best Picture, did Malcolm X deserve to be in the conversation with that? Darren, I'll throw that to you first, right? Because I think probably Tristan has captured what we're all thinking in terms of Pacino versus Washington. Did Malcolm X deserve the nomination? I know we're all by this point. Look, I'll tell you, in 92, 93, the Oscars meant something. They mean nothing now, okay? But back then they meant something. Was Malcolm X overlooked for Best Picture? Because we know that Do the Right Thing a lot of people felt that was overlooked. Is this the second Spike Lee film overlooked for Best Picture? Especially considering the fact that it's in the National Film Registry.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I was going to almost say the opposite with the Oscars of, not that they didn't mean anything in the 90s, but I feel overall in general, we put way too much into the Oscars as an award as actually representing something as objective as film. I mean, even at our 5-star ratings, there's times where we'll give things 5 and the other will give 1. And it's all because of where we were as we absorbed it. And that's the beautiful thing about film. It can mean different things to different people, especially the three of us versus an entire community. But yeah, I would say, no, I think in 92, I think we should have had more slots than 5. I think, especially over the one that you mentioned I'd never heard of, began with an H. I don't even know what that is.
Howard's End. Merchant Ivory was a big thing for about 5 to 7 years in there. Yeah.
So yeah, no, I think with the best picture nomination, meaning versus best director, meaning the entire production, the entire way this story was pulled together and shown in this biopic, I think you could easily have slated it in there. I mean, with Denzel losing, maybe because he won for Glory only a scant number of years before. So
I definitely think that's a factor because Pacino had never won. Pacino had been up there a number of times, blah, blah, blah. And I honestly believe that Scent of a Woman was hey, let's give Al Pacino the award here.
That's good enough for an award. We could justify that.
That is because being somebody who was a big fan of Pacino, that always felt like, there were a couple of performances before this one where he kind of got robbed. And it, like, the Oscars always seem to follow the tendency of like, oh, we kind of screwed this person over, so we're going to give them an award this year. Sorry, guys. Now, the follow-up question is, I'll throw it to you, Tristan, first. The follow-up question is that Roger Ebert and Martin Scorsese, who at the time was sitting in on the episode for Gene Siskel, who had, I believe, passed by this point, they both ranked Malcolm X among the 10 best films of the 1990s. Tristan, would you rank Malcolm X among the 10 best films of the 1990s?
When did they vote this? Was it in 92 before the decade had happened, or
in 1999? At
after
the end
the
of
Matrix came out? I'm just
I don't know where, I don't know what was in there in the rest of the list or whatever, but they ranked Malcolm X in among the 10 best films of the 1990s. Does it belong there?
Here is a list of movies that came out in the 90s. This is just a list. I'm not saying these are the top 10. I'm saying this is a list. You have Indecent Proposal, Independence Day, The Game, Awakening, Schindler's List, The Truman Show, Meet Joe Black, Ghost, Talented Mr. Ripley, Virgin Suicides, Romeo and Juliet, Eyes Wide Shut, Good Will Hunting, Speed, The Bodyguard, A Few Good Men, Shawshank, Bone Collector, Event Horizon, Goodfellas, Happy Gilmore, The Blair Witch Project, Twister, Mrs. Doubtfire, Stuart Little, Falling Down, Green Mile, Stargate, Liar Liar, American Beauty, Under Siege, Silence of the Lambs, Girl Interrupted, A Time to Kill, Matrix, 7 Years in Tibet, The Sixth Sense, Gattaca, Forrest Gump, Clueless, American Pie, English Patient, 7, Mercury Rising, Chungking Express, and Men in Black. No.
Okay, fair enough. Darren, I think you probably agree with Tristan on that one. Yeah?
I mean,
and Fight Club, 7.
Listen, Fight Club and 7, those are 2 slots right there. Okay, let's be honest with
Saving Private Ryan.
So I actually looked
that was
up
pretty good.
Boys in the Hood, Fargo, Election, Waiting to Exhale. Let's see, Selena, Joy Luck Club,
Doors,
Jurassic Park, Usual Suspects, Big Lebowski, Groundhog Day, League of Their Own, Casino,
Schindler's List,
Men in Black. I said Schindler's List. How Stella Got Her Groove Back, Jerry Maguire, Set It Off, The Fugitive, Scream, Goodfellas, Hope Dreams, Titanic, Something About Mary, Toy Story, Thelma and Louise, and yeah,
Hoop Dreams. Oh my goodness, that's an amazing film. Anyway, so basically, it feels like Tristan's encapsulation of whether he would rank it in the top 10 films of the 1990s feels like a good excuse for us to come to our own personal ratings and wrapping things up. And Darren, because I love to torture you, I'm going to throw it to you first. What out of this scale of 5 stars would you rank? How many stars would you give Malcolm X, the dream project of Spike Lee, who we saw direct Do the Right Thing? This is our second film in the House of Lee. how many stars would you give Malcolm X?
So I'm going to give it a 4 because of Denzel, which I know it's a director's discussion podcast, but at the end, I have to judge the entire movie. I think Denzel brings it to a 4 for me. I think, you throw around words like definitive, like I can't really see someone else making a biopic of this level and reaching the same heights of a 1992 movie. It was the right time. It was the right person. It was the right cast, pulling all of this together. Maybe if they come back with, his son, Washington, I think bring his son back and do
David.
the miniseries. Yeah. I think that would have been maybe to come back to this. But I think it educates, it teaches you history. It talks about this man's life. It takes you on a journey. Are there flaws? Yes. Is there pacing and their runtime? But really, at the end of the day, this is a great film. I could see why it's on many people's top lists. I can see why it has a Criterion Collection. I maybe don't agree with Ebert and Scorsese, but I think, I'm going to give it a 4. Also, I mean, I try not to compare it to other Spike Lee, but I've only seen the other one in this order of Do the Right Thing, and I feel it's better. I feel this is only 3 years later. We didn't talk about that, but going from 89 to 93 or 92, that's only 3 years. So Lee has grown. Lee, we talked a bit about, was he the right pick for this? And I can kind of see the executives being like, I don't know. Cause you're like, they're not throwing a huge budget at him, but like this has to, especially with the conflict around the director at the beginning, it needed to pan out. And I think it did. I think he did a great job. Like I also mentioned, kind of tamping down the surrealist look of some that Do the Right Thing had, but that was a very different movie than that. It's not like that's his style and he has to have those Dutch angles and, breaking the fourth wall. Like, I don't want Malcolm X to break the fourth wall. He's already looking right at me as he's giving those speeches. So I think that would have been too much, but no, I will give it a solid 4.
That's fair. Now, as a follow-up question, where would you cast Lance Reddick in this film?
Our good friend Lance. Even though he did such a great role, or such a great job in this role, I kind of want him to be Delroy's character of West Indian Archie. It's like a pocket role, which I think works great for Lance, where it's like a little teeny bit. And, Delroy was intimidating. He's a large individual. He towers over you. Like you can tell you don't want to cross him, but Lance giving his like deadpan, cool as ice delivery, I would be terrified to cross him if he was a gangster. Terrified.
I will go into my own rating, and I will start with Lance Reddick, and I will say that is exactly who I cast as Lance Reddick. Was West Indian Archie. I think that he would have been incredibly effective because of his height and because of his speech patterns. He would have been extremely terrifying in the moment where he is coming for Malcolm's blood. That would have absolutely unsettled me, and probably been even more tense than what happens when Delroy Lindo walks in and he's like, "Never sit with your back to the door. I'm here for all of these sorts of things." Like, I completely would have put Lance Reddick in there. I am also going to, because of I will cop to a nostalgic factor that goes into this, but I think that I don't particularly care for the way that Lee finishes the film. The coda structure doesn't particularly work here. I get what he was going for, but again, it feels like, hi, you just watched 3.5 hours of film. I'm going to tell you how you should think about this. And it's like, just let the work speak for itself, please. I naturally recoil at stuff like that. I think that also the movie struggles a little bit with whether there should be a voiceover from Malcolm X through it or not. That's an element that's a little weird and not handled completely appropriately. So I wind up giving it a 4.5, 4.5 stars. It's in my heart, it's a 5, but I have to acknowledge the flaws with it. And I do give half stars, so it's 4.5 for me. Tristan, to round us out, where do you see Lance Reddick, and how many stars do you give Malcolm X?
I think this is the first film since we've started the Lance Reddick piece where we've all agreed. The moment
yes,
that Delroy Lindo came on with West Indian Archie, I was like, this is Lance Reddick. Even though, and Darren, you said this, Delroy Lindo completely killed it in this role.
Yes, he did.
And I firmly believe that every movie is better with Delroy Lindo than without Delroy Lindo.
That is a damn fact. That is 100% truth. Yes.
But for all the reasons that you guys said, Lance Reddick would have killed it too. I appreciate this movie, and I prefaced it at the beginning talking about who the hell am I? It's in the National Film Registry. It's on a lot of top 10 lists, top 100 lists, and everything like that. This movie struck a chord. It's got a Criterion edition. Speaking of which, I got the 4K Criterion just to watch this, and I'm glad I did because it looks beautiful. But for all the reasons that I said, I have a lot of issues with this movie. I don't think it's structured well. I don't think it's paced well. I think they should have focused more on creation, not just recreation. And I wanted to see more of Mecca. I wanted to see more of his turn. I wanted to see more of that. And I feel like that's a huge knock against it. I wanted to see more of Betty. And it's just, it's hard because this movie is a good movie. It's a good movie. This is just my rating of it. I give it 3 stars. Because there's a few things that really piss me off. And, I've already talked about. One thing that I haven't talked about is that the character of Baines, played by the amazing actor Albert Hall, isn't real.
Mm-hmm.
That really, really bugs me. The idea that they used a composite character to show this man come to Islam, which was the true love of his life, honestly, when he became a Muslim. This defined this person in real life. Malcolm X is a Muslim through and through. He is devout in the faith of Sunni Islam. Devout. This is the reason why we're talking about him today, is because he was a Muslim. And the idea that you took away the fact of his true conversion by making a composite character to make it, in his opinion, more cinematic, instead of allowing his brother and sister's letters of love, kindness, and understanding and faith bring him to that love, kindness, and understanding and faith, is a huge betrayal to the character and something that really pissed me off. And, some people may be saying I'm overreacting. I don't think I am, but that's okay. I try to qualify my statements as much as possible, considering the many sensitive topics that we've talked about tonight. But that's too much for me. That's too much for me to give it 4 or 5 stars. I'm giving this 3 stars, knowing that I'm in the minority and that this film struck a chord. And it's not like it's poorly made. And I appreciate Spike Lee for sticking to his guns and giving the vision of what he wanted to give. But for me, that's my rating.
Fair enough. I think that this is very interesting because of the way, Do the Right Thing and Malcolm X are 2 very important films in terms of film history. I mean, Spike Lee has made a splash. Next week, though, we're going toward a film that hasn't necessarily had the same impact as Do the Right Thing or Malcolm X. And Darren, what is it that we're going to be looking at here on Houselights?
Next week, we're jumping 10 years from 1992 to 2002 with 25th Hour here on Houselights.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.